Hi, I'm Krisha, and I have to find enough unique ways to film static objects to fill a 10-ish minute video. Now, everybody who's known me for basically any amount of time knows that I'm a huge fan of Bionicle. Started in 2004 with my very first figure, that being Toanuju, and kept going strong until its second cancellation. But unfortunately, due to being too young at that time, I missed out heavily on the early years and on its history. I eventually got a lot of the older sets and already reviewed the Slizers, but for the longest time I didn't even know that there even were construction themes before Bionicle. And the same story applies to today's subject, the Roboriders. These guys came out in 2000, sandwiched in between Slizers and Bionicle, and running only for a single wave. However, I do think that this one wave has a lot of merit to it. But what even are Roboriders? Well, they are toys, obviously. Like Slizers before them, they had a mostly vague lore intended for children to create their own stories and fun. Once again, there is a world made of several biomes, this time being corrupted by an evil virus. Apparently the best course of action for the inhabitants was to create armor for themselves that works as wheels for special bike-like vehicles. Well, that certainly is an explanation for this particular gimmick. Obviously they exist just to be cool toys that kids would want and parents would buy. What is out there of the lore makes very little sense, but who cares when bike goes zoom? Each of the Roboriders has 2 or 3 of these armor wheels with adorable molded and printed gears inside them, and a special front rake that allows you to shoot out the front wheel. You can play marbles with it, or do wheel combat, but it is an even more finicky gimmick than the Slizer's disc arms. Plus, why would you ever shoot out your only mode of locomotion? But interestingly enough, they are quite different from each other besides the basic premises of the line. Let's check them out individually, in no particular order. We'll start, I think, with Lava, the obligatory red one of the group. Interestingly though, other than some printing on his head, a new piece for that year, it doesn't really have that much flame theming on it. Instead of something like a flamethrower or fire swords, it has these 2 halberds which seem adorably ineffectual, seeing as they can't possibly reach past the front wheel. The build is relatively simple, with basically just these 2 specialized lift arm pieces and some struts between them. This connection allows you to grab the top and move it around, making its tiny axis swing in the process. It's a nice mechanism, but one of the weaker ones in the lineup. Plus, I just can't shake the impression that it looks like a lizard lying on a wheelbarrow. Swamp doesn't fare that much better, I'm afraid. It actually has a fairly similar build, just with a longer rear rake and a different mechanism for the weapons. These little katanas are attached to the arms and chassis with some rods and a rubber band connection, making them pathetically twitch when you press down on it. I appreciate that thanks to the rubber bands it has working rear suspension, but other than that it is basically just a modified Lava. It looks more aerodynamic thanks to those sleek swords, but its mechanics work worse, which is not a fair trade in my opinion. But while we're here, let's quickly look at the Swamp Craft, its tiny Polybag companion. There were 4 of these, but unfortunately this is the only one I have. I find its shape a bit awkward and the positioning of the wheels means that it's almost always scraping the floor, but it has those cute pew-pew lasers, so all's forgiven. What's interesting is that the wheels don't actually have passengers in them, almost as if this was just a drone scouting for the real deal guy. Luckily it's only up from here, with Frost. Frost is very unique, and probably my favorite of the small Roboriders, almost entirely thanks to those colors. The white and trans blue pieces look absolutely stunning together. It looks extremely swift with those beautiful white tubes capped off with icy spears, like they are being generated by a freezer inside robot and ready to fire like some sort of ice gun. They don't do anything, but it's nice to imagine and pretend. This one is actually a bit unique among the Roboriders in that it reuses the Slizer torso. Sadly this means no springy suspension-y action, but you can fold it up into more aggressive or more aerodynamic configurations. Next up is Dust, who is actually very similar to the Granite Slicer. It's the second one of these with the 3 wheels, and the first of the group rocking this particular gearbox style. Just like with Granite, I absolutely adore these colors. The tan pops really well against the grey and black. It is rocking a slicer head instead of the new block, making it look much more angular and robust. It has a nice face print, which is actually a running theme among these. I'm not sure why they have faces, since they are just vehicles for their wheels, but I guess personification wins over logic. They probably didn't need to have their names inscribed on their heads, but it's at least a nice aid when writing the script. Remembering which ones are Slicer or Roborider names is a bit hard sometimes. Back to the toy itself, pressing down on it once again activates the spring-based rear suspension and also makes the rods on the sides move, a bit like an angry steam locomotive. The rods are tipped with these bolts, which probably didn't need to be chromed, could have just been silver, but at least they give it a cool look. Onyx is probably the most motorbike-like of the bunch, with a secondary slicer head that looks like a passenger seat. It also has suspension, but now, twisting the seat makes the rear rake go up and down thanks to the internal worm gear. Its colors are of course not much to talk about, with just the black and grey. Not that black and grey are bad, it is a valid color scheme, but not one that gives you any surprises. It is not monochrome, of course, it does have color, although I actually added some with this replacement rubber band. Some more color are those pew-pew lasers on the sides. They do stick out a bit awkwardly, but they're there and I appreciate them. Its wheels bring some more color and they are interesting in that they actually glow in the dark. Not sure if I'll find a way to show this while filming, but it is a nice effect. Last of the small sets is Power, once again with this chunky chassis and the worm gear operated axle and suspension. It looks very similar to Onyx in its main build, but curiously the gearbox is actually backwards. With the head looming over the front wheel, it has a very fast and sharp look to it, which I always appreciate. And as you may have noticed, it is the only Roborider carrying over the ball and socket system from the Slizers. Those two arms once again can't reach anywhere useful, but you can pose and angle them however you want. Point up for some simulated motor shots, spread them out to gun down anything in front of it in a wide radius, or tuck them in for maximum drag efficiency. Anything you imagine them doing, you can pose them for, and that's just what toys are for. Now then, allow me to introduce you to what I think is one of the greatest toys of all time. It's the Boss Roborider. This thing looks absolutely massive compared to the regular boys, and it just oozes coolness. It's like the designer asked themselves, what would be the coolest toy that we can make? And apparently the answer is...
combining Bionicle motorbike to real Batmobile.
I'm struggling to come up with superlatives here. I love this to bits. Let's wind back a bit. This particular vehicle is in fact made of 3 separate components, but it definitely is more than the sum of its parts. The central component looks really awkward with a massive rear tire and a minuscule front wheel. Its build is more involved than the regular set, with the more built-up block over the chassis, but only marginally so. The headprint is actually very nice, the only one that doesn't have its name printed on it. They probably didn't want to compromise this design of the gas mask breathing fire. But then you notice the Technic pins sticking out on the side and you remember that this thing combines. What it combines with are those... pods? I don't know what they are supposed to be, but I think they look better on their own than the core. They really remind me of the Batpod from The Dark Knight, with the massive front wheel, fake front rake and the aggressive posture. Interestingly, they don't have a head of their own, instead getting by with just this orange air intake, flanked by those retro Technic panels. But getting it back together and combined, by just plugging these pins into the pod's rear axles, the look comes together and all the flaws of the individual components disappear. It just looks imposing and massive now. Those front wheels are like fists that can beat up any road or surface this drives on. Using the suspension, you can actually make it stomp or smash, which feels really fun to do. You can also, of course, change its posture, once again from low and sleek to tall and menacing. It can even do some posing, make the arms different heights, and it looks like it's taking a sharp corner. Have I convinced you to love it yet? Anyway, I suppose I should talk about the alternate build for this set. Yes, like most other Technic sets, this too can be built in a different, but in my opinion, very much inferior way. I did build it once when I first got it, but I quickly fell in love with the Gorilla Batmobile. The other mode is a flying jet thing with a motorbike platform, and I did enjoy the way they connect, but the build itself for the jet was a bit odd, and it left you with a ton of unused pieces, including one of the massive tires, so I didn't bother with building it again. I am a bit tempted to get a second one just to have both though. But that's the Roboriders. 6 moderately flawed but fun and inexpensive canister sets and 1 massive chungus of awesomeness. They are definitely an interesting step in the history of Bionicle, not being quite a step up from Slizers, but no step down either. Just a different approach to the action figure market, and a very cool and unique one at that. You can see the concept developing and refining into what would become Bionicle, with the 6 elemental heroes in canisters protecting a decaying foreign world from threats. Unfortunately, other than the flaws of the individual figures, the line had some conceptual issues that kept it from being remembered fondly. First up, there were no villain toys. With action figures, it's vital to have the opportunity of conflict play. Autobots vs Decepticons, Toa vs Rahi, He-Man vs Skeletor. Launching the wheels is a cute idea, why not have something to launch them at? The second problem is that the Roboriders weren't characters. Literally were vehicles for the characters, who are just some weird pogs. Children might enjoy that, but if you give it a name and personality, they will get attached. But of course, the final and most important problem is that LEGO didn't give them room to breathe. It is fairly apparent that this line was just filler for the half-year gap between Slizers and the monumental entrance of Bionicle. I of course am glad that Bionicle came along and was as good and successful as it was. I literally would not be the person I am today without it. But it's interesting to imagine an alternate world where 2001 was the year of the Roborider. Perhaps the sets would have got cooler, more complex, and given us a set that surpasses the boss in every aspect, or perhaps it would have been a failure and Bionicle would never be born. But let's not dwell on what could have been and focus on what was and what is. What was is a flawed but nifty line of weird motorcycle robots. What is now, and it is time for this video to wrap up. See you next time, hopefully with Combine the Worlds Bruticus. Bye!